So the only hope actually was brought to us by Ukrainians. Because if Russia is defeated in this war, then of course the regime will be changed. And so we're coming back to the same issue, whether to to hope that Putin himself will stop, decided one day that, well, the war is not going well, let's stop it, let's try to be friends with the West. And I do not think this is going to happen because, we had this people in Russia ruling Russia before, Soviet Russia before, right? For Lenin, this was world revolution. For Trotsky, this was permanent revolution. For Stalin, this was just military occupation of one country after another country. And by 1941, by the way, he took the half of Europe. So Putin is basically continuing where Stalin, stopped.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. And this time we are catching up with the Russian-American historian and journalist, Dr. Yuri Felshtinsky. Dr. Felshtinsky is a former Hoover Fellow at Stanford University. Famously, he wrote Blowing Up Russia, Terror from Within with the late Alexander Litvinenko. And his latest book is called From Terror to Terrorist State. Dr. Yuri Felshtinsky, welcome back. It's good to see you again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We spoke in June last year, and it was shortly before the Wagner Group's aborted march on Moscow. There have been several notable news stories since Yevgeny Prigozhin's murder or death, that of political prisoner Alexei Navalny, and of course the sham election and the terror attack on Moscow, to name just a few. What events inside Russia have struck you as the most significant?
Well, all three actually are important. It's very difficult to choose between them. The Prigozhin episode demonstrated that there are forces within the Russian special services who are trying to redistribute power between the office of president of Russia, and this is Putin, and the FSB. And this is led by Mr. Bortnikov and Patrushev. And I think this was a struggle where probably Patrushev was trying to renegotiate some deals with Putin, but this probably had something to do with, personal power, the level of personal power which they have within the Russian state. Navalny death, of course, indicated to the whole world that the regime is very brutal and that Putin is intending to kill everybody who is competing for him for power. This was specifically true because in 2020 they tried to poison Navalny and they just didn't succeed. And then they slowly were killing him in a colony, in a prison first, then colony, and it's like a labor camp. And then, of course, the same was happening to Boris Nemtsov, who was killed in 2015. He also was trying to compete with Putin for power. And the last episode, the terrorist act in Moscow, is very, I was going to say, to use the word interesting, but it's the wrong word, of course, because this was a tragic event. But what was important that the United States actually told the Russian government on 6th of March that the terrorist attack is going to happen. Now we know that they actually mentioned that particular concert hall, Crocus City Hall. We also now know that Iranian government informed the Russian government that they have sources saying that there is going to be a terrorist attack in Moscow. And instead of trying to prevent it, Putin went to Collegium of the FSB. Collegium of the FSB is the ruling structure of the FSB. This is like Politburo in the old Soviet Union. So instead of saying that they should be watching for a terrorist act, he told them that this is a provocation and a blackmail of the United States and that they should not react. And that's why, despite all these, notifications, there was no police force present at all during that particular concert, although that particular concert hall was named. What probably is an indication that, for reasons which are unclear, the Russian government made a decision to let this terrorist act to happen. And the question is why. And I think we do have by now, we have at least two indications that we think we know the answer why. First, a major discussion about the abolition of moratorium for death penalty happened in Russia after that particular terrorist act. And we heard the voices not only of Dmitry Medvedev, former president of Russia and former prime minister of Russia, who was kind of demanding to return death penalty, but also from many members of the Russian parliament. So we still do not know if they would return death penalty to Russia, but this might be one of the reasons the government decided to let this terrorist act to happen. So, this would be used as a reason for returning death penalty. And secondly, starting 22nd of March, when the terrorist act took place, that's the only topic everybody is discussing. Indeed, during the same period, the Russian army actually destroyed the city of Kharkov in Kiev, in Ukraine. City of Kharkov is the second largest city in Ukraine after Kiev. It's very close to the Russian border, and it takes Russian, missiles 40 seconds to hit the city from the Russian border. And since Ukrainians do not have now assistance from the United States and everything is kind of frozen with the support, they do not have air cover, of course, and they do not have, anti-missile equipment to shut down missiles, and the city is destroyed, literally. And it's 1.3 million population city. And they're using bombs for the first time during the war. For this war, the Russian planes are just bombing the city from the airplane, which again are staying in the Russian airspace and firing those, self-propelled, whatever bombs from the Russian territory into Kharkov. And no one is talking about Kharkov because everybody is talking about this terrorist act.
It seems strange, though, that President Putin would want to divert attention from that, given what's gone on since the full-scale invasion anyway.
Well, again, the Russian government used this terrorist act for propagandistic purposes as well. He is saying that Putin precisely was saying that this is done by Ukrainians, although, of course, for people who were arrested, beaten, tortured, presented to Russian public, they do not look like Ukrainians, to be honest. But nevertheless, the government is claiming that this is done by Ukrainians. But this is impossible to sell even to the Russian public, I have to tell you, because the situation is kind of obvious. It's obvious that this was an Islamic terrorist act. But again, propaganda is using this for its purposes as well, without great success. Well, this is, yeah, this is probably a lie. They announced actually that they're going to draft additional 100,000 people into the army before the terrorist attack. So this was announced, and they plan to draft somewhere between 100 and 500,000 people into the army. I do not know how successful this draft is going to be, because the last time when they announced that they are drafting 300,000 people into the army, and then they managed to collect this amount of young men, but we know that probably the same amount of young men left Russia during this process, because the border is still open. So I would say that every time they are announcing that they are going to draft, 100,000 or 500,000 people into the army, the similar amount of people probably leaving Russia again. And what means that they take young men from the Russian economy, which it's struggling. It's struggling not in the sense that it's in terrible shape. No, it is not, but it's working like 24 hours, 7 hours, 7 days a week to support the production of military weapons for the war. So if they take out of this economy from 200,000 to 1 million people, it's probably going to be felt by economy. So I don't think that they're able to draft, 500,000 people as they plan, but they probably will be able to have like additional 100 to 200,000.
When we spoke last time, you were fairly convinced of President Putin's ambitions beyond Ukraine to include Moldova, the Baltic states, and to recreate the influence of the Soviet Union. You said that Russia sees this as a war with NATO. Have you seen anything in the last 10 or so months to either change your mind or indeed confirm what you thought?
Well, I think everything we hear and see confirms this. What helps us a lot are the texts which are published like every other day by Dmitry Medvedev. He has his own Telegram channel, and he publishes absolutely brutal, unhuman texts, basically saying that we are ready to fight for dozens of years if this is necessary, and if it takes us dozens of years to destroy Ukraine, we will fight dozens of years, but we will destroy Ukraine. And basically, the most often word which he's using is to kill. We will hate you. We'll kill all of you, all of you, all of you. We will kill you, kill you, kill you, kill you, kill you. And this is addressed not just to Ukraine, but basically to the entire Western world. And then of course he's blackmailing the West with nuclear weapons, which sooner or later Russia will fire into Europe. So yes, nothing changed for better, and I think Europe should be ready to the possibility of direct confrontation with the Russian Federation. I think this will happen sooner or later. And of course, everybody prefers this to happen late and not sooner. And that's the strategy of the West, not to provoke the Russian Federation to this full-scale war. But I think it's inevitable.
So you say you think direct confrontation is inevitable, and yet you have President Putin on the other side now saying in his recent comments that it was complete nonsense that Russia would attack NATO members. How do you see that direct confrontation happening?
Well, first of all, prior to the invasion of Georgia, Russia was saying that they do not plan to invade Georgia. Prior to invasion of Crimea, Russia was saying that they do not intend to invade Crimea. And what the most important, of course, that prior to invasion of Ukraine, Russia was saying literally a day before that they do not have any plans to invade Ukraine. So this is cheap trick to which we should not pay attention. They do intend to invade, and the it's not very simple for Russia to invade Europe because it's united. It's much stronger indeed than the Russian Federation, and at this point, Russia doesn't have actually the second army to invade Europe because the army is, of course, involved in the strike, in the war with Ukraine. But the plan is that if Trump comes to power on the 21st of January 25, if he withdraws the United States from European affairs and problems and involvement into the conflict, and that's what's going to happen, then Europe would stay against the Russian Federation without American nuclear umbrella. And then strategic balance in Europe, of course, will be damaged, and then Russia would be in much better position. I think this slowly is understood in Europe, and statements like the recent one by Macron that he is expecting, or that they should expect French troops to be involved in a Russian Ukrainian war. This is the result of this understanding of the inevitability of direct confrontation. What's important to understand, whether this war will take place or will not, that Putin is not going to stop. Russia is conducting a permanent war with the Western world. The question is if Putin would have enough, power, military power, to take Europe and to move further to Moldova, because the next step will be Moldova, not the Baltic states or Poland. And I'm a historian, and I was thinking, well, historians, that's what they do. They're thinking, well, how the world could prevent the Second World War, right? And there are some steps which probably could be done from a historical point of view, looking back, and how you could prevent the war against Ukraine, the recent war, right? And again, there are some certain steps which could be made. And I was thinking that, for example, to prevent the Russian invasion to Moldova, if Ukraine is overrun by Russia, right? Because so far they do not have common border. There is no common border between Russia and Moldova. Then, of course, you should actually unify Moldova with Romania, because historically this was one state at one point, and this is the same people and the same language. And through this, Moldova would become member of NATO, and through this, you ensure that Russia would not invade Moldova, because this would be a war against NATO, right? But you see, the problem is that the decisions are very simple. Historically speaking, when historians are looking into events, the decision to prevent this or that are very simple, and were very simple, are very simple. For example, in order to prevent this confrontation, you need to help Ukraine to win the war. But the problem is that current strategy is to prevent Ukraine from winning the war, and not to allow Ukraine to win the war, and at the same time not to allow Russia to lose the war, while the strategy should be the opposite, to allow Ukraine to win the war and to force Russia to lose this war.
Do you think we are now marking the 75th anniversary of NATO, and the NATO Secretary General has announced these plans. They are still plans, but to try and set up this new 5-year, $100 billion fund for NATO to support Ukraine, presumably future proofing support for Ukraine in the event of there being a President Trump in the future. This is not the energized, resolute alliance that President Putin envisaged at the start of the full-scale invasion. Do you think, though, that NATO is now progressing towards what you say is necessary, helping Ukraine win the war?
Well, first of all, NATO thinks that there are some, how to say, legal ways to ensure that Trump would not leave NATO and will continue to support Ukraine. And trust me, if Trump becomes president, he will find the way to avoid all those, legal instruments or problems which were created on his way. He will stop. The U.S. support for Ukraine. He will stop U.S. support for NATO or U.S. participation in NATO, and he will find a way to avoid it. So this will not help us. Another problem is that if you plan to have this war for 5 more years, you have to understand that you are destroying Ukraine, because Ukraine is a country which is much smaller than Russia, and Ukraine has no air defense. So Russia is destroying the country from the air. And recently they changed its tactics. They started to destroy big cities. They were not doing this. I mean, they were striking against cities from time to time. But now, as we see, the intention is to destroy the major cities of Ukraine. So they started from Kharkov because Kharkov is very close to the border. It's the easiest target. But they will continue, and we see it. They continue to strike more aggressively against Kiev, against Odessa, against Nikolaev, against Dnieper, etc. So that's what they're doing. And that's precisely, by the way, again, what Medvedev wrote in one of his texts, that if this would take us dozens of years to destroy Ukraine, we will fight for dozens of years. So they are ready to fight for dozens of years. They will proceed with the slow speed, because it seems to be that they're not able again to have this war in the format of blitzkrieg as they were hoping 2 years ago. But they're not going back, and they're not going to stop. And this will continue again as long as this regime in Russia continues. Now, it's not just Putin. That's another problem. It's a collective Putin. It's the FSB in power. That's what these people intend to do. And the idea is that if Trump withdraws from European affairs and Europe is left against the Russian Federation, then Europe basically has no nuclear power to defend it, and then Russian nuclear arsenal becomes more I guess important. But the problem is, once again, to avoid this, you need to win this war. Ideally, you need to win this war before 20th of January 25, just in case. But in order to win this war, all you need to do is to give Ukraine offensive weapons, contemporary one, and allow Ukraine to strike against the territory of the Russian Federation. Because at this point, Ukraine is not allowed to strike against the Russian Federation with contemporary Western weapons. They cannot even use machine guns if they are striking against the territory of the Russian Federation. While indeed the tactics should be precisely the opposite. Ukrainians should be allowed to strike against Russian Federation, starting with Moscow, because Russia is a huge country, but this is a country of one city, and that city is Moscow. And No one cares what's happening, outside Moscow. It sounds very strange, but that's precisely how it is, because everything is concentrated in Moscow and Russia. And you've seen, coming back to Prigozhin, you've seen what was happening in Moscow when his military commander Utkin sent a text that they're moving towards Moscow. The entire city was just dead within minutes. Putin left, Medvedev left, some oligarchs were boarding the planes, leaving Moscow. It was actually interesting to see how Moscow reacts to that one text or Twitter, whatever it was, that Prigozhin is moving to Moscow, which he never reached and indeed never intended to reach. But that's how frightening it was. So, if Ukrainians will get contemporary weapons, modern weapons, striking weapons, if they are allowed to fight, to strike against Russian Federation and to strike against Moscow, this war will be over in 2 weeks, 2 months.
I'm just wondering, with the way you've described what President Putin's ambitions are, how you react when you hear reports that France's defense. I mean, I know you mentioned what Macron had said about France and foreign troops being prepared or necessarily may have to be deployed into Ukraine. What do you make of the fact that the France's defense minister is reported to have had a 1-hour phone call with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Shoigu, reported to have reaffirmed France's support for Ukraine, but at the same time, it does seem like he might be making diplomatic overtures on fighting terrorism ahead of the Olympic Games. What do you make of that?
Well, I think this is a shame. I think this is a mistake. I think this is stupid. I do not know what other words to use. You should not conduct Olympic Games when you have a war in Ukraine, in Europe. This is a war in Europe. You should not have Olympic Games. Period. And you should not hope that Russia, would stop the war for the duration of the Olympic Games. This is not going to happen. And indeed,
But
you
my
should.
understanding was that he might have been trying to work with Russia or establish some kind of link. Sorry to interrupt you, but in the light of what happened in Moscow on the concert hall, and that there was some kind of I don't know, easing of or attempt to make some kind of diplomatic overtures in that way.
Well, this is a dream, the Europeans and Americans, and we had these publications in the United States as well. I think in Times that now Putin has this opportunity after this terrorist act to come to go back to the old understanding that we have a common enemy, and this enemy is the ISIS, and so instead of fighting against Ukrainian, we should all together fight against ISIS, which is still alive. Blah blah blah. This is not going to happen. This is not going to happen. It's all a dream. This was a dream, by the way, a wrong one, which Europe had for a long time, when Europe was hoping and thinking that Russia is actually a partner, that yes, we have common enemies, that well, we have difficult relations, but we have common enemies, and we are difficult partners, but we are partners. Indeed, it's clear that we are not partners. We may be having common enemies, but the only enemy is ISIS, which is competing against Hamas, against Hezbollah, against Iran, because with all other enemies of the West, with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with Iran, the Russian Federation is the best friend now. And we've seen after 7th of October, after terrorist attack against Israel, that Russia openly started to support all these organizations, and delegations of Hamas were in Moscow, delegations of Hezbollah were in Moscow, the Iranian government was in Moscow, Palestinian organizations, and some of them are extreme, were conducting like a congress in Moscow. And again, on 3rd of March, Medvedev published the text basically saying that Russia openly starts to support all anti-Western political movements and organizations, either left or right. He does not care, as long as they're anti-Western and as long as they're destabilizing the world. This is the reality. I do not want to say that this is new reality. This is probably why, the FSB brought Putin to power in 2000. But I think this reality now is clear to us. This is done in open now, and I think that, again, I think because of this, the fight is inevitable. The open confrontation between Russia and Europe is inevitable unless Russia is stopped in Ukraine. But in order to stop it in Ukraine, you have to change strategy, and it has to be a strategy that Russia will lose this war and Ukraine will win this war, and not the opposite. And this is a problem now, and even recently, we hear several demands from high-level politicians and government officials in the United States, high-level demands to Ukraine not to strike against the Russian Federation. What is ridiculous from the military point of view? You cannot fight the war if you are not allowed to strike against your enemy. You cannot win the war if you are not allowed to strike against your enemy. But this is precisely what is demanded from Ukraine.
You have said before that Putin doesn't care how many people have to die in the war in Ukraine, that he equates the high death toll with a great war in a kind of quasi Stalinist kind of way. At the moment, as you've said, Ukraine is being supported to be able to keep up the fight but not win it. Can the war still be contained and won in Ukraine?
Well, it could be contained in Ukraine, but to contain it in Ukraine and to win in Ukraine are two different goals, right? So far, the idea is that you help Ukraine, and again, it doesn't work for recent weeks because American Congress is still didn't make a decision allowing Ukraine to get American assistance. So far, this is not so. But basically, the idea is that Ukrainians will halt Russian aggression. So the West would help Ukraine as much as it needed to halt Russian aggression within Ukraine. And through this, the war will not spread beyond, because Ukrainians are holding Russians. But at the same time, Russia could not be allowed to lose this war, because if Russia would see that it's losing this war, then Russia would use nuclear weapons because it would have no other choice. So the idea is to have this permanent war in Ukraine. Uh, the strategy again, not to win, because to win means that Russia is loses, and that's precisely what the Western world, unfortunately, I have to say, is trying to avoid, because he's afraid that as Russia is bluffing, if we see that we are losing the war, then we will destroy the entire world with nuclear weapons, because why do we need to exist if we are losing this war? So, and this bluff, ironically or not ironically, tragically, this bluff works. That's precisely why everybody is trying to help Russia not to lose this war. Otherwise, Russia would lose this war a long time ago. So, if the goal would be for Ukraine to win this war, not only Ukraine will win this war, but the risk of confrontation with Russia will be, finally destroyed and dealt with. So my point is that the only way for Europe to avoid the war is to allow Ukraine to win. Otherwise, sooner or later, this war will take place.
Just want to touch on an investigation that's been reported on this week, and it was carried out by The Insider, Der Spiegel, and CBS's 60 Minutes. It's about Havana syndrome, this mysterious illness which has affected US diplomats since 2016, perhaps even earlier, causing headaches, dizziness, intense, painful sounds. It's suggesting it can be linked to this Russian intelligence unit, the 29155. What can you tell us about this unit?
Well, it exists for some years, and the problem. I heard about that problem from one of the Russian defectors. I would say in 2008, and he was saying that that's what they were doing in Moscow. We were talking about Moscow, and that that this is a kind of undetected weapon, which is very useful because it's impossible to prove, because it's working kind of slowly, and for this reason it's very effective. And he even told me, for example, that there are some mobile units which are following cars of American diplomats, again trying to poison them. These are special cars which the driver is defended against this radiation, and but the car is radiating this ultra wave radiation. Again, I'm not a specialist, so I'm not able to understand the technical point, but basically this is a microwave uh, without a metal body. If the microwave waves works without this metal body, right, it becomes dangerous. So yes, it was developed. Yes, they're using it. It's difficult to say how widely they're using it, but what again? What I was told, to make it simple, if you take microwave out of the metal box and fix it against the wall, and if this wall is not thick enough, then people living in another room are going to be poor.
So it's really interesting. You say you spoke to a Russian defector who told you about this. I mean, are you convinced that that what they're telling you is factual, that it's true, and this? I mean, this report has circumstantial evidence, but it's not conclusive, and the US is refusing to elaborate on what it knows about it. So I'm just wondering, are you convinced then that this is reality, and that this person is credible that told you this?
Well, this is difficult to say, but he sent me some documents. He sent me some papers. I let be honest. I talked to law enforcement in the United States. They went to that person to see him. They talked to him. They met him. They talked to him, and they told me, "Well, don't pay attention. This is not serious." I said, "Okay, fine." And this was the end of this story. And but again, this was like 2008, 2009, probably. Uh, you know, and uh, Russia just killed, of course, Litvinenko with radioactive poisoning, but this was probably even before Georgia, and this was definitely before 2014, 2022. You see, now I think people started to discuss it, not because the problem is new. This is not new. A couple years ago, a person whom I knew through one of the conferences, who was working for CIA some years ago, she of course retired, told her that they have, they discuss this with Havana syndrome with some former CIA officials who, I mean, not officials, employees, who were working for CIA, and they had it. So she was actually kind of consulting with me whether this is possible that Russia might be involved. But now everybody started to talk about this again, simply because the attitude towards Russia changed. You see, in 2008, you probably would not think that Russia might be involved in this kind of activity because, once again, Russia seems to be like a friend or a partner fighting against common enemies, etc. Now we see we look at Russia differently, and that's why now we understand that well, maybe those people really do use these weapons as well, because they are using any weapons to weaken the West. I mean, and all tools are good in this fight for them.
I mean, it's interesting that you say that we look at Russia differently now. And one point you were really at pains to emphasize last time we spoke was that we're in this unique situation because the first time in history you say the secret security services, the FSB, run and continue to run a country. How do you think the correct attitude and policy should be towards Russia?
You mean starting 2000 or today? Because now, well, now we have a major help, and this help is coming from Ukraine because Russia attacked Ukraine, provoked the war, uh, hoping that this will be like a blitzkrieg and everybody will capitulate like a country after country. Uh, they never believed that Ukraine would be able to would agree to fight, would start to fight against Russian aggression. This was not the plan, and this is the only hope to bring a change to Russia. Otherwise, Putin would stay as a president until he dies, whenever he will die. And again, there is no internal opposition in Russia. There are no internal forces which are able to change anything in Russia. And you mentioned Navalny, but that's precisely why Putin was killing him. So they preventively kill all potential leaders. The border is open, and a lot of Russians, and we are talking about hundreds of thousands, probably millions of Russians, they left Russia. So only those people who actually, I do not want to say that everybody who lives in Russia today supports Putin. That's not what I want to say. But all those active people who already actively oppose Putin, to fight against Putin. They're either in prisons, and there are not too many of them, or they emigrated because they realize that it's just make no sense. You cannot change regime peacefully in Russia. You could change it only, sorry to say this, through revolutionary war, right, against the Russian government, against the current Russian government, and there are no uh, possibilities for this because the weapons are controlled by three groups basically: the FSB, the Russian army, and the Rosgvardia, which is like internal personal military force of Putin, right? So there is no opposition. There are no political parties which are fighting for power against Putin. uh, this was done slowly, starting 2000, and the result is that there is no even theoretical possibility that this regime might be changed internally. This is not going to happen. So the only hope actually was brought to us by Ukrainians, because if Russia is defeated in this war, then of course the regime will be changed. And so we're coming back to the same issue, whether to to hope that Putin himself will stop, decide that one day that, well, the war is not going well, let's stop it, let's try to be friends with the West. And I do not think this is going to happen because, we had this people in Russia, ruling Russia before, Soviet Russia before, right? For Lenin, this was World Revolution. For Trotsky, this was permanent revolution. For Stalin, this was just, military occupation of one country after another country. And by 1941, by the way, he took the half of Europe. So Putin is basically continuing where Stalin, stopped. That's what he's planning to do. He's planning to return Eastern Europe under the Russian influence first, and then, proceed further again with the speed which is possible or allowed. But they're not going to they're not going to change. I mean, the Russian government is not going to change. That's what they will continue to do. And again, they rebuilt, economy. The Russian economy is actually capable to conduct this war unlimited amount of years. They have enough manpower. They have, oil and gas still for sale. And from this point of view, Russia is getting enough money to support the war. People who live in Russia, they're not protesting. Those who were against the war, they left Russia. The borders are still open. So that's what's happening, unfortunately.
Dr. Yuri Felshtinsky, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much. You've given us a lot to think about. And Dr. Yuri Felshtinsky is the author of Blowing Up Russia.
Thank you.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. My thanks to our producers today, Louis Sykes and Morgan Burdick, and for you for watching. If you'd like to support us, you can subscribe now, or you can listen to Times Radio for the latest news and in-depth analysis, or go to thetimes.co.uk. For now, though, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.